Welcome, everyone. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
And I'm Sylvia Earle, an ocean elder, explorer at National Geographic and founder of Mission Blue.
This is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community on topics of wonder and interest. I am going to, of course, now attempt to share my screen, which is the most wonderful and interesting portion of this entire thing.
But you've done it before.
I have.
So maybe you could do it again.
I can try.
He's already done it.
Yay.
Amazing.
Eureka.
So before we really dive in, we want to remind everyone that
the world is
blue.
Blue. There it is. Beautiful blue.
And later on in the conversation, we are going to take some questions and answers, which you can put into the Q&A box at any time. And we will get to those towards the end of the program. We do have a hard stop towards the end of the hour because our guest today, Dee Boersma, is she's got some more Zooms to try to get to as well. But
We're
Dee,
so glad to have.
we're so pleased and honored to have you join us today.
Yep.
Dee is
I just want to say that picture shows the Earth is blue, but the thing that's most important is we don't know that there's any kind of sentient life anyplace else other than Earth.
Exactly.
And we know very little about our sentient life here on Earth. And certainly with the discrepancies we have between countries and between peoples and education and everything, there's a lot we need to do on our Earth here to understand what we actually have and the wonders of our Earth. And it's the only place that there are penguins.
Absolutely.
Yay. No penguins on Mars?
There's a chance.
How sad.
Dee is very well known, renowned for her work with seabirds, and particularly in their role as indicators of environmental damage. And she holds the Wadsworth Endowed Chair and is director of the Ecosystem Sentinels at the University of Washington, with the real focus on penguins, particularly the Magellanic and the Galapagos penguins.
I just have to say that we met like a gazillion years ago.
Yeah, when I was in my 20s, Sylvia, and that's a gazillion years ago.
And that was in the Galapagos Islands, and you were in a tent looking, even then, goes back to the 70s, looking at the little penguins and sharing the warmth of your tent with the endemic native, lovely little furry rats that live
Oh yeah.
in Fernandina.
Yeah, I got used to the rats, but I never was really keen on them. But what I remember most about you, Sylvia,
They were keen on you.
they ate my bananas. As long as you didn't have anything in the tent, you were okay. But the thing I remember most, Sylvia, is you invited Chris Coheed and I out to dinner, and on your boat, which I guess was owned by the Janssen Swim Company. And I never will forget that dinner because you had ice cream on Fernandina. I mean, you said,
Right
would
on
you
the
like to have
equator.
ice cream for dessert? I couldn't believe that anybody could have ice cream on Fernandina.
It was a miracle.
It was,
Strawberry, as I recall.
Yeah. Let's see if we can get going here. Well, here you are with a little dude. Look at this guy. He's great.
This guy's, that dude's name is Turbo.
Turbo.
And he got his name because he used to stand under the Turbo truck. And when we went to town and the Turbo truck went away, he looked completely lost. I think he was probably 3 years old at the time. He's probably now around 16. I haven't seen him this year. I hope I get to go down and see him in January. Argentina is supposed to open up November 1st, but it's been terrible throughout Latin America in terms of COVID. Not that it's been great here in Seattle or any place else, but it's been awful down in South America.
Absolutely. And it's really hard for scientists as well, because you've got these sort of gaps in your research, and just because of these travel restrictions, and you really do, when you get to know animals that are long lived like penguins, you really do worry for them, what's happened to them during this time. And we've seen with some animals, they've kind of gotten a break from people, and they're kind of rebounding, but it's kind of stressful to not know.
Well, it's stressful to not know, and it's becoming harder and harder, as both of you know, to get permits to be able to do scientific research. So there's the challenge of doing research, finding the money, writing the papers, getting them in peer-reviewed journals, training graduate students, getting people interested in this. But now we have the bureaucratic problem of permits.
Right.
And it's, you want to take blood samples. I mean, you got to get export permits, you got to get import permits. It costs time, it costs money, and it's not doing the science. And
No.
that's what I find the most upsetting and frustrating, is the bureaucracy that keeps us from knowing what these animals are doing and learning about them. I mean, one of the things I've been most lucky about is to be able, next year will be 40 years at Punta Tombo studying Magellanic penguins. I've studied Galapagos penguins off and on, but over 50 years. So none of the old penguins that I knew, in 1970 in the Galapagos are still alive, I'm sure, but we put bands on that they would lose, aluminum bands, so that they would wear off in the Galapagos and they'd lose them. Now
Right.
we put on little mouse ear tags in their webs, and mostly they keep those, but I just started putting mouse ear tags on in 2010. But we do have Galapagos penguins that we know are older than, 10 years old.
Right.
But I don't know how long they live. But
Yeah.
I know from Magellanics, because we've put, regular stainless steel bands on, that some of those birds are more than 30 years old.
Yeah.
Now that's a surprise to people.
It
And
is.
that's in the wild.
Yeah. And this is where most people associate with penguins, it's, being Antarctic
The subantarctic
or
islands.
subantarctic islands.
Yeah.
And in popular culture, we have to put up with this sort of thing, right? We have our little friend penguin here, and we have, we see penguins on, penguin books and penguin hockey team and penguin this, that, penguin is villains, with Batman and so forth.
Book that.
But penguins, we've got this is the real penguin book.
You've got your fingerprints on that one.
But
Yeah.
but we see, these greeting cards that come out, and people kind of get their, this one, I mean, oh my God. What advertising?
Penguins are really good at selling things, because people
are.
want penguins.
They're really cute. And then of
Whether
course,
it's Coke, or it's airplane rides on Alaska, penguins sell.
and then, we had March of the Penguins, which was an Academy Award winning film, which really helped people to kind of understand just how really tough and tenacious these birds can be.
And how appealing.
And appealing, absolutely. It's
I
just
think
beautiful.
I think the most important thing about March of the Penguins is people started to learn more about penguins. But the funny thing is, it's the one thing that there was really very little division between the conservative right and the extremely liberal left. Everybody likes penguins.
Yeah.
And the conservative right loved March of the Penguins because they said, basically, look, penguins are really diligent. They take care of their kids. They have to feed them. They suffer all these endurances to be able to raise and stick with their family. What they didn't know, or they didn't tell anybody, is the highest divorce rate amongst penguins, emperor penguins. Now, Magellanic penguins that I've been studying for so long, they still have, they're not any better than humans. We have about a 50% divorce rate.
Wow.
And Magellanic penguins. And the interesting thing is, what makes it less likely you're going to divorce? If your egg hatches. Doesn't matter whether it's 2 eggs or 1 egg, but if an egg hatches, you're more likely to stay with your mate. And of course, over time, you're more likely to raise chicks. So if you stay with the same mate for like 7 years, on average, they raise like 7 chicks.
Nice.
But most penguins divorce, and they haven't been successful at all in their first attempt
Oh, yeah.
with that mate.
Good thing.
Yeah. They gossip.
And they're gossipy, right? People don't realize like how vocal they really can be.
They can be extremely noisy.
Yeah.
And they have many kinds of calls. I think one of the things that's most interesting is that these Adelie penguins that you have on the screen now, as well as Magellanic penguins, as well as Galapagos penguin, have a call to locate other penguins. And that call goes, oh, and they use it at sea. Like, hey, anybody want to go foraging with me? They go, oh, and the other penguin comes over and then they go foraging together.
Oh, that's cool.
Do that again. I want to hear your
Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
All together. Oh.
Oh,
I've been able to call Galapagos penguins up to the boat. And one of my graduate students it was an undergraduate at the time said, should I catch it? And I said, well, can you grab its foot? And she said, yeah. And she grabbed its foot. We banded the penguin, weighed and measured, put it back in the water. But they
Nice.
really are, interested in other things that could be penguins. And so if you go, you can call them in for quite a distance.
That's great. I do the same thing with the great horned owls in the backyard, but
so how many actual species of penguins are there, Dee?
Oh, geez, Sylvia, as soon as you get into that, there's arguments. But
Yeah,
right now there's general agreement that there's 17 species of penguins, but there's going to be more species of penguins as we get more information on genetics and the isolation between populations. We think that there's only one monotypic species of king penguins, but they're found all over, the southern hemisphere. So it'll probably get divided up over time because they mix some, but they don't mix a lot. Just like people used to say there are two species of macaroni penguins and royal penguins, but royal penguins are only found on Macquarie Island that's owned by Australia. And now people say, no, that royal penguin is just kind of a well-marked subspecies of the macaroni penguin. So there's going to be splitting and clumping that will go on. But the Galapagos penguin, only one of those.
Right.
Magellanic penguins found on both Argentine side and the Chilean side, but only one so far.
In a way where each species kind of looks alike, but what's wonderful is that everyone, like your truck penguin, they're all individuals with personality, with faces, if you know what to look for, and that each one is its own self. And
absolutely. And most of the people that have worked with me down at Punta Tombo would like to have an egg that they could lay for Turbo, because we've known him, for more than a decade, but he's never gotten a female.
Oh,
a female did come into his nest one day, and she ended up moving next door and mating with the guy that we called Thermo that was next to the thermometer. But Turbo's never had a mate, and he goes back to his same nest, which is really good, but he has to walk almost a kilometer inland to get to this nest, which may be why no female has really decided to mate with him.
Yeah,
it's
it
far,
could be.
far away.
It's far away from all the action.
And there's a lot more males than females at Punta Tombo. Females have a higher mortality rate. So a lot of males are bachelors for many, many years. And maybe some of them for their whole life. We don't know about Turbo yet. I'm always hopeful. Next year is your chance.
Could be. Maybe during the COVID pause, he's had some success.
I hope so. But I'll know in January when I go down and visit him.
Yeah.
Great.
And these guys perched up on this iceberg here, the edge of this ice shelf.
Yeah, they live much of their time actually in that cold water. So it's not just what you see when they're where we are. They're air breathers, of course, but they spend a lot of time underwater. I love it. Oh, there you are.
Here you are with this is in Antarctica, right?
No, this is at Punta Tombo.
Oh, this is Punta Tombo. Okay, great.
Yeah, I'll give you one other gee whiz fact.
All right.
One of my graduate students, Katie Holt, was there on January 19th, 2019. And on that day, it got to be 44 degrees Celsius in the shade. So what's that, 120 something?
Awful.
It's hot.
Really hot.
It ended up killing a lot of penguins. In that one day, it got so hot that something like 260, more than 260 adults died. A lot more males died than females. And that was because it's January and any of the males that failed were back in their nest trying to attract females for the coming season next September. And
Right.
they got overheated. Some of them died within a meter of the ocean. They
Oh.
tried to make it, but they couldn't make it.
Yeah.
And
just
couldn't get cool.
Yeah.
And we had 90 chicks died. And of the 90 chicks that died, many more of them were likely to die that had full stomachs. So, like what your parents have always said, don't go eating and then go swimming. You got to wait an hour for digestion. Well, the problem for these chicks is they had a lot of food in their stomach. So all the blood went to help digest the food in the stomach. And then they didn't have any blood to keep cool.
Right.
And so they overheated and died.
That's so sad.
Oh,
And that's what, that's what we're really worried about is this climate change. It's getting worse for penguins. Even in the Galapagos, we have much more rain than we used to have. And when it rains really hard, and if they are not well protected, they can get wet. And if they get wet, then they die. And
Yeah, the
at
chick.
Punta Tombo, they often get, completely soaked, and then they become hypothermic and they die.
Yeah.
So you don't want to have penguins get wet, and you don't want to get them too hot, but you also don't want to get them cold. So at Punta Tombo, the problem is they get too cold if they get wet.
the babies.
Yeah.
The
The
little
chicks, because they're
yeah.
just all downy.
Yeah.
They
The
don't.
downy.
That's
Yeah.
right. They're downy. And so it's just like you going out in the rain in a down coat. You find out right away, ooh, this down coat is
Bad
not very,
choice.
yeah, bad choice. It's not very successful at keeping me warm.
So how do they manage, Dee? There's a wet penguin. Of course, it's not doing well because it's about to be eaten,
Yeah.
but they have lots of little feathers that keep
Yeah.
them.
They have over 100 feathers per square inch, and there's more feathers in Antarctic penguins than there are on Galapagos penguins. But yeah, the interesting thing is just like you, when you get cold, if you get really cold, you'll see the hair on your arms or your legs stand up. And the same thing's true for penguins, except they have much better control over their
You get penguin bumps, not goosebumps.
yeah, well, that's basically what it is. It's
Yeah.
goosebumps. So they can raise their feathers or lower their feathers. So when they get really hot, they lower those feathers and get the air out so that they can stay cooler. And when they're cold, they just raise those feathers, and then they have an insulating layer underneath their feathers.
One of our intrepid friends, almost
Nahum.
Nahum took
Yeah.
this picture.
Yeah, he took this picture. It just kind of shows that, there are predation events that happen with penguins, and of course the leopard seal being the biggest, baddest one in Antarctic waters. But the real threat to the penguins, as we've just been talking about, are kind of human induced
Climate change being one, yeah.
But and around Antarctica,
Climate change and fisheries.
Fisheries,
Penguins
yeah.
have got to have something to eat. And that's what's happening to African penguins in particular. There used to be millions. Now there might be 10,000 breeding pairs. It's a tragedy.
yeah,
And the reason that there's so few African penguins is because of the fisheries. The fisheries have taken out all of the small fish. And in fact, fur seals, which numbers have increased, the fur seals are taking breeding African penguins. They single them out when they're coming back to feed their chicks because their stomachs are full, and they go for these penguins and eat the stomach out.
just the
That's
stomach.
where the fish is.
Wow.
So, they're desperate. The fur seals are desperate, but so are the penguins. And of course, we're taking all of this food, particularly this krill, and we're feeding chickens with it, or,
Squeezing it into
farm-raised fish.
oil,
Cosmetics. yeah.
cosmetics, but it's one of the biggest fallacies, I think, is that that there's an excess of krill there to be taken. Sylvia points out there is no excess in nature.
No, there isn't.
No, and particularly we want to harvest the most dense populations of krill.
Right.
And those are the ones that the penguins would like too.
Yeah.
And particularly if it's close to the colony, so that they can feed their chicks.
So
So it's a real problem.
I am just baffled why we have any business taking anything from Antarctica at all. It's just as if anything in nature is free, right? They have a zero accounting base. All you have to do is go out and catch them, you have to get the boat and
The fuel and the
whatever,
crew.
but the real target, whether it's used to be whales, now it's fish and krill and shrimp and whatever it is, but you don't have to pay for them. We call it harvesting, but it's not harvesting. It's
No.
just taking, it's just killing.
And the real problem is we don't do the accounting right, as you say.
Right.
If you can catch it and you can do something with it, hey, it's free, but it's not
No, it
free.
isn't.
And we've got to have a different accounting system so that people will know and pay the true environmental cost. I mean, we
Exactly.
all know what the major problem is. There's too many people and too much consumption. And nobody wants to do something about either one of them. Maybe we can do better with closing the loops and recycling, but there's too many people and there's too much consumption. And
Especially-
we want to have penguins and stuff. You've got to leave some of the world, like at least 30% of it, for the animals, for the wildlife.
Yeah.
Right.
Other food.
It seems like it's such a low bar to afford protection particularly to the Antarctic waters, because there are no indigenous people that live there that you could make a case that require some fishing to happen.
It's
This is all
subsidized as it
just
is, yeah.
extraction, and I think it all started when
And it's all subsidized by governments because
Right.
it's too expensive to go down and fish in Antarctica. That takes a lot of fuel.
it's a lot of
it's-
fuel. It's a long way
They're
to go.
always subsidized.
It's
Yeah,
taxpayer subsidy.
right.
Yeah.
So it seems one of the things that people could do would really be to, advocate for full protection for the waters around Antarctica would be a start.
To match protection that has been in place for the land for a long time, but not the ocean surrounding the land.
No.
And we've stopped killing the whales. We've stopped killing the penguins by and large. We have clever ways of killing them by taking their food.
Sure, yeah, there's always that.
Well, we catch them as bycatch too. We catch
Yeah,
them
yeah,
in net
right.
still.
Yeah,
And entanglement, right?
Yeah.
So I think the key is getting people to really understand they care about penguins. If you care about them, then listen up. Look at the whole picture and then do your part to save them.
Well, and you, Sylvia, have done very well by not eating any of your friends. So, I mean, I know you don't eat fish and
Or krill,
or krill.
Bill or any of your friends.
or squid.
But I think the thing that people don't recognize is that these things are important food items for other wildlife.
It's
And
Exactly.
if you're gonna eat, like for example, if you're gonna eat sardines, which penguins eat them out of a can. Eat the whole sardine and use the whole sardine.
Can and all.
Don't be eating, the krill that is gonna do farm raised salmon or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the worst way.
Right, because they're taking these krill or pressing the krill down into oil, for
Yeah.
a little capsule or something like this. It's just, why not get those omega-3s from algae, which is where the krill or fish get it from to begin with.
They don't manufacture the krill. They get it through the
Through the food chain.
phytoplankton. Yeah.
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 These little guys are just so much more valuable alive than
In-
captured.
in krill
And they're
cages.
so cute.
They're adorable,
And like the penguins, everyone, even though they're billions, is an individual. That's the miracle of life, that you've got this enormous capacity for individuality, but there's a common recipe for life. And one of the most important things in the 21st century is understanding the connection between life and climate, the carbon cycle. I mean, economists follow the money, but climate scientists are beginning to follow the carbon dioxide, the capturing of carbon, the sequestering of carbon, especially in the ocean. And when we extract large quantities of ocean wildlife, which we're talking about, hundreds of millions of tons of creatures that have been extracted from the global ocean that are disrupting the status of carbon. We could do our part by letting the wild fish of all sorts stay in the ocean. The creatures who live there have no choices. We've got plenty of choices about what to eat. I guess there's some people in coastal communities and in island countries that do rely on wild creatures from the sea for sustenance, but mostly it's a luxury choice. And
Yeah, it's just not a luxury choice for some villages in Russia and Alaska. I
yeah,
mean, you know, they're eating whales, and it's not that they're doing it, you know, because they want to kill whales,
no,
but they don't have a lot of choice.
right.
Right.
And whales will feed them through the winter. And you can't get a grocery store. I mean, look at where the stuff has to come from for those
Yeah.
Alaskan communities.
Yeah.
That's really energy intensive. So in some cases, I can see why you want to be able to harvest walruses and seals, but there's no penguins that are living up in the Arctic. And in
No,
the Antarctic, there's no people living down there. And so
exactly.
why is it that we have to harvest the food for all of the wildlife?
Yeah, there is no reason except for short-term
Greed.
gains and greed.
Greed.
Yeah.
So it's one thing that I think, knowing that consumers really can make a difference and choose with their wallet to,
Yeah.
not buy the krill oil, not, and to really
By the lie.
buy the,
about krill
don't buy
oil.
the lie. But really to help groups like Ocean Elders, that sponsor us here to help advocate broadly for the just complete protection of the
Right.
waters around the Antarctic
Mhm.
and the high
Absolutely.
seas.
Yeah, that is part of the high seas.
Part of the
actually.
high seas, exactly. We're seeing this, kind of this breakup and loss of sea ice and, other hazards that change that's happening to these guys, where they really need all the assistance that we can muster at this point.
And it's so beautiful down there.
It truly is. But then these little penguins that are down around the equators, coming back to where the body of your work has mostly been focused on, and looking at some of these little dudes and thinking about how when you first went down to,
Aren't they cute?
they're
They
adorable.
are.
But
Very
to think,
adorable.
They're well dressed, they're clean, they're neat.
they're very
They
tight.
stand along the shore occasionally when they've got enough food to eat.
But it's astounding to me, reading about your work down at Punta, Tombo, that in 1982, when you went kind of down there and were working with these penguins, that you discovered that there was a whole industry waiting to be hatched that was going to convert these guys into oil and leather for golf gloves, of all things. And it's just like,
Right, and to give meat to the poor.
yeah. And I'm just, it's appalling. And, tell us about that effort to kind of make the shift within the government there to protect these birds more from an economic tourism point than just as pounds of meat and oil.
Well, it's the consumptive part. I mean, the original thing was, hey, penguins are free. If we can harvest them and turn them into golf clubs and give meat to the poor and harvest the oil, I mean, hey, we're making something out of nothing. But of course, that's not true. And when you think about how would they harvest, they would take penguins from the breeding colonies. So you wouldn't have breeding colonies for very long because
No.
penguins are social. They like to be close together. And at Punta Tombo, there probably at one time were something like in the 60s, maybe 400,000 breeding pairs. We're
Wow.
down to less than 200,000 breeding pairs now. So half of what they were like in the 60s. And I've just seen them going down every year. Why are they going down? Well, they spend the winters up in Brazil. A lot of them on their way up there get caught. But what I noticed when I first went down there is so many of them were dead on the beach covered in oil.
Oh
And
dear.
that was another one of those externalities. It's cheaper when you transport the oil to, put the oil in the tanks, go up to Buenos Aires, have the oil processed, then you got to go back down and get more oil. Well, you got to fill up with seawater. That's your ballast water. You get down there, and then what are you going to do with that? The easiest thing is you just dump it in the ocean.
Right.
And so you end up dumping the oil into the ocean, and that ends up oiling penguins because penguins are minding their own business, swimming from here to there, and they end up swimming through oil and they get oiled. And once they get oil like that, then their ability to thermoregulate is hampered. I mean, they get cold because now the air is not underneath all their feathers. And so if you're cold, what do? You get out of the water. And so the penguins get out of the water. There's no food on the land, and they eventually starve to death.
Oh dear.
And it was awful. And
Yeah.
so I'm really glad that, I mean, at first, frankly, the Argentine government said, well, we have laws, people don't do that. And so we started putting pictures of oiled penguins on television, talking about it on the radio, publishing papers, and saying, look, there's lots of penguins dead from this. And it took until from 1982, when I first went down there and was horrified, until 1997. And they moved the tanker lanes further offshore. And not only did they move the tanker lanes, now there's people that will get fined if they dump this ballast water. And so they only were dumping the ballast water, as Sylvia will say, because that was an externality. If you could dump it and not have to process it, hey, you save a whole day that you don't have to spend in port, and you don't have to pay for getting the oil out of the water. It's much easier. You just throw it in the oil.
Yeah, just throw it overboard. It's out of sight, out of mind,
Right. And we have to start looking at a lot of these processes carefully and showing, hey, this is a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, everything from Amazon delivering everything. Is it easy? Yeah, we like to get it. But how many miles do those trucks? Okay, now they're going to do more electric. But all of this is still energy. You should be paying for that as a consumer. And then maybe you'd make other choices.
Yeah.
It's hard. I don't ever buy anything from Amazon because they've put so many people out of business. They've stopped the little businesses. But we have to really look at these supply chains and critique those and how they're affecting wildlife as well.
Because they do. And here you are. Is this working to restore some of the nesting sites? Is that what you're doing here?
Yeah, this is Caroline Capello, one of my graduate students, and me. And penguins are smarter than us. And we have built nesting sites for them, particularly in the Galapagos. And they need shade. They need to be able to get out of that hot sun. And so we've been building them nesting sites. And they're using them.
That's really awesome. I like them. They're like a little, make it a little bigger here. You have to stage the condo for them.
That's right.
Move it around a little bit for them.
But it's really important to have nesting sites that are well shaded, that are close to the ocean where there's food, so that when there's food available, penguins can breed. And as Sylvia said, okay, there's a lot of native rice rats on Fernandina, and there's cats on Isabella as well as rats. So penguins have a tough time. They got to be in a place that's predator free. That's why penguins live in the Antarctic. There's no foxes there. There's no polar bears there. There's no walruses there. They can breed there safely. The problem now in the Galapagos is that there are introduced predators.
Right.
And introduced.
But yeah, it's again one of these human factors that we don't really think about. But creating the spaces for them has also been necessary because of the intensity of storms increasing and
sea level rise
as well, kind of making some sites that they might have used decades ago now inaccessible to them.
That's right. It's really important that we try to restore some of these islands that were major penguin breeding islands. I think one of the most exciting things to me is that they've taken the rats and the cats off, and rabbits too, off Macquarie Island. Nice. They've improved the habitat for penguins. So penguins should do better on Macquarie Island.
It's one of the subantarctic islands.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to see cats and rats go off of all the Galapagos Islands. Yeah. Extremely difficult to do and expensive.
Yeah.
But
the native rats belong, and they've kind of figured out how to make peace with the penguins, but the introduced Norwegian rats, the Norway rats, and the cats and dogs and you name it, the exotics that have been introduced. They actually had.
And these are Galapagos penguins up there. Yeah. You can see some of them, like the one on the right of your screen. That female, she's really fat. So she's done really well. And if you give them a chance, they will do well.
Mhm.
Right. It's the thing. Just give them a break.
Mhm.
Don't take their food.
Don't take their food.
But it really, I think, you can see a little bit of a shift happening where governments start to realize that the value of these birds alive really really does have value in terms of the tourists that are willing to come and view them, but it still has to be kind of managed. I know you were instrumental in kind of preventing that concrete path from being put through the one area there at Punta Tombo, and in the Galapagos. It's always a struggle because, now there's like hundreds of thousands of people that go there every year in hopes of seeing penguins and other endemic birds. But it all, as you say, it always comes at a price.
But then probably the fishing pressure is
The fishing pressure goes up, right?
is part of the problem too.
Yeah.
Taking what they eat, just as taking the krill. There you are. Let's see, that's you on the left, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was much younger, that's at Punta Tombo, probably in about 1964.
Wow.
Not really, it's really like 84, but a long while ago though, anyway.
Yeah, well, getting up close and personal with them, thinking like a penguin, that's part of your gift, Dee.
This is one of these nesting holes.
This is a nesting hole that we've dug in the Galapagos. Of course, penguins are fussy. They like to breed ideally in lava tubes. There's not very many lava tubes, as Sylvia will tell you, in the Galapagos. So if you take a crowbar and a hammer, you can dig these out, but they want to have them kind of deep and it takes a lot of work. But once you make one of those, then it'll be used for the next, probably 100 years.
Wow.
Until it erodes and goes away. So we've been building nesting sites like this. But of course, when we built the easy kind, which is the ones I preferred to, that looked like carports, you put the lava on the sides, lava top, they don't like those as well.
Yeah.
They're
No,
just
they-
not as good.
they like that effort that you put in,
Yeah. Well, the temperatures are better.
That's true too. It's all about staying regulated. And this
Yeah.
guy sort of like cruising along, looking fat and sassy.
This is a really nice picture because you see those feet out behind. Those feet are acting as rudders.
Mhm.
So the feet go out behind like that, and then they can bank just like an airplane would.
And the
Because they're
pectorals,
flying through the water.
the
Yeah.
pectorals are like wings.
Mhm.
I mean, they are wings.
Yeah, yeah. They don't paddle with their feet. Everything's done with those wings, but this is the way they control. This is the rudder.
Right. And it kind of points to the need to protect the fish and the other ocean wildlife that they're reliant upon, because they have to swim a long way, oftentimes, to get the food to feed the chicks to be successful. And I was reading that they kind of swim at the same rate everywhere they go, right? That they're always just trying to get from point A to point B quickly with the food before it completely digests in their system, so they still have something for their chicks.
Yeah, we've been able to show that for Magellanic penguins, they swim at the same speed day and night. And that's because they're trying to get back as quickly as they can. And many times they're swimming more than 100 kilometers.
That's
Wow.
incredible.
So they make it look like Phelps is, not as great a swimmer. They're better.
Yeah. They're just like little super athletes just getting out there. But it's one more reason that it's so important to protect the areas where they are from the overfishing. So they actually do have the
Well,
chance.
fishing, period.
Yeah.
Fishing. There should be no fishing around the Galapagos. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no indigenous population of people in the Galapagos. Everyone who lives there has arrived within the last century.
That's
And-
true.
Some of them even more recently than that.
Oh,
And
yeah,
so-
most of them.
Yeah.
When we were there in the Galapagos in the when I first visited there in 1966, there were about 1,000 people in
Yeah.
all of Galapagos, and very, very few visitors. Today,
And 2 Jeeps. And now
Yeah.
there's all kinds of cars and
There's
roads.
tour buses even. So,
anyway,
but this is one of the real fish of contention.
it's a little Salima.
The Salima.
It's a-
These Salimas, the Galapagos penguins love to eat. And that's
Right.
exactly what they focus on.
Yeah.
and they're taken for bait. I mean, the sad thing is that that's part of the reason that taking these little fish by fishermen so they can catch bigger fish really bites right into the food supply for the penguins.
And other, endemic birds like the flightless cormorant and the
Seal,
and the
sea
seals and the
lions.
sea lions and
Yep,
a whole
pelicans,
host of the animals that are so heavily
flightless
protected.
cormorants.
Right, but they're so heavily protected on the land, and yet their food supply is kind of
Up for grabs.
up for grabs. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's one thing when there were 1,000 people and they were relying on the ocean as a source of food. They eat the sea turtles once in a while, but the impact was relatively low, and maybe there could have been some accommodation for people taking some of the life from the sea. But today, it's hard to find a shark. I mean, there's some sharks that are more common than others, but the sharks are depleted, and the water's a little further out. The tunas, international tuna fleets have come in and are extracting from, again, look at the whole system. We can look at the segments of it, penguins to the Salima, and the fact that it's a cycle. You get nutrients put back into the system. That little phytoplankton prospers when the penguins poop. But
No, but the Galapagos is a microcosm, and I think it shows it so well, Sylvia. Again, back to what we said at the beginning, there's too much consumption and there are too many people. So we got to do something about these, and that's the elephant. You don't see, people saying, well, yeah, I mean, what happened to zero population growth? They changed their name. It's population connection. I mean, we've got to reduce the number of people on this planet. And I'm not keen on the pandemic or on wars, but we should be able to look at this logically and say, we don't need to have families with 5, 6, 7, 8 children. This is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's what the people actually do as well. It's
and what they
armed with today's technology, you could have a fraction of what we now have and still do huge damage and do ourselves in.
Yeah.
So I think we now,
if we did it smarter, we could do a lot less damage. And
Uh-oh, we don't want that. Oh, there we go.
you want much less damage, much more wildlife.
Exactly.
right on. That's seems so obvious, Dee, but a wise old guy once said that the obscure we see eventually, the perfectly obvious takes longer. It was Edward R. Murrow, newscaster.
He was good.
Yeah. Oh, very good. So we're going to jump over to some questions, and because I know you do have limited time today, but and then
Got a little bit of time.
We get a little bit of time yet, and then at the end we actually are going to try to slip in a short little video if we have time. But let's see. Diane is saying, do you have a theory as to why there's a higher mortality rate with the female penguins at Punta Tombo?
Yeah, I do. Life is tougher for those females. They're smaller. So that means even though that it costs less to run a female, per ounce or gram of body weight, they don't have the storage reserves. So when food gets to be limited, they can't fast as long as those bigger males. And so I think that that's a problem for them. And we think, but I don't know, we're going to put some satellite tags out on birds right after they finish the molt to see where they spend exactly their time in the winter. But I think the females are much more likely to be caught as bycatch in Brazil than the males. But, we really
behavioral difference that makes them more susceptible.
Well, because of their ability to fast is shorter than for males. That's part of it, but I think that they may be feeding more inshore where they come into set nets more often than the males. We're really not sure, but that's true if you look, so there's no set nets really in the Galapagos, but there are more males than females in the Galapagos too. So females just have a higher mortality rate. And for the Galapagos, when there's not enough food to build up your body reserves so that you can molt, that's going to be harder for females than it will be for males.
So Dee, you have to jump through hoops to take a blood sample and then move that sample across borders and so on. But it's okay to go kill penguins with a fishing net with no penalty and no permit.
Yeah.
It's just incidental. It's a cost of doing business, right?
Absolutely. That's one of the problems. I mean, scientists are easy to control, but
well, I don't know. Some scientists
control those
are
purse
not.
strings, yeah.
Yeah, but poachers are not. I mean, look at the Galapagos. I mean, Sylvia, I'm still shocked that somebody wrapped up baby tortoises and tried to smuggle them out. And they were probably going to China, but they had like 50 of them that they caught. And how did they catch them? In the Galapagos now, they have X-ray machines, and they put your luggage through the X-ray machine coming into the country and out. And they saw all these funny little round things in there, and they made them open the bags, and there they were, 50 little baby tortoises.
Wow.
Some of them died because they were smothered by the saran wrap, and then they released the other ones. But this is crazy. And they've done that with marine iguanas and stuff. I mean, they caught a couple of years ago, they caught that guy that had baby marine iguanas that he was going to ship them to Europe. I mean,
Like, what are they going to feed them? It's just,
but if you can get $5,000 a piece for these,
yeah.
You're going to do it. And that's a problem. And just like, I mean, now we've got tuskless elephants because of the poaching in Mozambique.
Yeah.
I mean,
and rhinos
selection
too,
will
they just
favor
yeah.
females and males that don't have tusks
Yeah.
because they're not going to get shot.
Yeah.
But you don't want to do this by natural selection. We want to do it in a much more humane way.
Absolutely. All right. Christina says, she says, thank you, Dee, for all of your excellent work. But do you know if the Venezuelan oil tankers have released ballast water with oils into the sea? Are they still doing that?
I have no idea. Venezuela, fortunately, is much further north than Argentina. So I have not, followed that. But I will say that all of us can make a difference, whether it's supporting Sylvia's hotspots or whether it's, supporting the Center for Ecosystem Sentinels. If people go to my website on Ecosystem Sentinels, you'll see lots of videos on Galapagos penguins and Magellanic penguins and things like that my students have actually made with footage that I've taken as I go to the Galapagos or I go to Argentina. But there's so many things that individuals can do, and educating yourself about what some of these problems are that you guys have been talking about is really key. You don't want to eat krill, and you don't want to take those omega-3 pills that come from krill. I mean, there's lots of individual choices that people can make that will make the world better. Absolutely.
Hear, hear.
Okay, the next question. What about ocean plastics and penguins?
Oh, God.
She has no opinion about this, you can see.
Yeah. Well, I think the real problem is, what about ocean plastics and people? We're eating incredible amounts of plastic. Sylvia's fish eat lots of plastic. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Should we have single-use plastics? No, there's no reason for a lot of these things that we want as consumers. And so again, it's the individual choice. You gotta, not do it, but it's tough.
It is tough because it's so often, you get to a place and, you're trying to make the right choice, but the only choice is something in plastic. And, like, what are you supposed to do? And then, now you have this thing, and then how do you dispose of it correctly? And, it's just like this whole huge problem. But, we see it in the ocean so much where seabirds do accidentally ingest pieces of plastic directly and maybe feed it to their chicks, like with the albatross. And I don't know
All
if
of them do. All of them do. And I was working in Alaska in the 70s on fork-tailed storm petrels, and they threw up plastic particles because it looked to them like it was a crustacean. And so they were busy eating it, of course.
Yeah.
So we need to have that in the pricing of so many of these things so that people pay the real cost. And then if you want to buy a Hummer, fine. I mean, I've always said what I'd like to do in selling cars is just hook up the exhaust right away to the driver of the car. I'd like to see how far they go. Because that's an externality. You put all that pollution into the air and then somebody else is sucking it in later and they end up with asthma or whatever. But that's an externality. You don't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Not
Well, we all
the
pay
price
for
in
it.
your
all pay.
gas.
Yeah.
But I
And
think
you've got to close those loops better so that people actually know that's the real cost.
Exactly.
I think the good news, Dee, is that this is really the first time, 21st century, that we have the capacity to connect the dots at the level we now can.
Mhm.
We call it ecology, connect the dots. How does this relate to that? And you realize everything relates to everything else,
Mhm.
to everyone else. And by pulling back and looking, as we've tried to do with this now that we can, and share information the way you are sharing it right now to a wider audience than was possible going back even 10 years ago. I think the reason for hope is that I think of it as a superpower of knowing what we couldn't know. We're far from knowing all that we need to know, but the rate of awareness is, and connecting this to that when you make a choice to take krill oil instead of some vegetable-based omega product, you're part of the problem.
Mhm.
If you just trace it back, where did this come from? Who is affected by, look at the supply chain and consider the cost, the real cost. Kids are the best hope because they come at a time when this information is readily available. It didn't even exist when I was a child. The view of Earth from space did not exist
Mhm.
for knowledge of the existence of many of the creatures that are now in supermarkets. I mean, now we have this avalanche of new insight, and you're kind of growing up knowing that the world is in trouble. And to see your future as a kid as something probably less complete than the future your parents had, but you can do something about it. Maybe you can kick the shins of your parents and say, please,
Well, I mean,
you've got
that's
to do something.
kids are educating their parents about these problems in terms of
Yeah.
recycling and pollution and sentinel species, et cetera. I also am hopeful that we'll get more places like the Center for Ecosystem Sentinels, because I want to make sure that we're training undergraduates and graduate students
Absolutely.
in
Yeah.
whole ecology. I mean, geez, Sylvia, 40 years ago, ecology was, the top. Everybody kind of wanted to go into ecology. Now people are going into nanotechnology, all kinds of little things. And not that those are bad, but we need to know more about the natural world. We're not going to be able to model our way out of the situation we're in.
Gotta go
I
get-
like models fine, but I want to know more about the real world and what we can do to make it better in the real world. And
Yeah.
that's why your hotspots are exciting. And
Yep.
that's why long-term studies, in my view, are so critical.
Essential.
Because if
That's
you don't
where
spend, 30 years of your life really understanding and figuring out how it works, how is somebody going to come after you and make it better?
Right. It's the shifting baselines and really being able to, like you say, connect the dots and measure time, change over time, both good and bad.
Mhm.
We've got a couple more questions.
okay.
Going to buzz through them here. Jean wants to know, how far north in Brazil do the Magellanic penguins establish colonies in the wintertime?
Well, they never establish colonies and they rarely go ashore. They just stay out in the ocean. The only time they go ashore is if they're sick.
Ah,
And so Magellanic penguins have gone all the way up to Bahia, Brazil.
Wow.
Much too hot for a penguin. And usually they're young penguins. And it appears that the penguin's idea is you leave Punta Tombo and you swim north and you find food. And if you don't find food, just keep swimming north. And so many of them do die from starvation.
oh, it's really so sad. Jenny is asking, what is your opinion about penguins in zoos and aquariums?
Okay, this will surprise most people. I like zoos and aquariums. And the reason I like them is because I don't think people will see many of the species that I care about, like penguins. They're not going to go to the Antarctic. So I see these creatures as ambassador animals. You know, they really can tell us about how incredible these creatures are. I mean, Sylvia and I were at the Indianapolis Zoo Prizes, and they had the flamingo mingle. And what that meant is they had you sit out on the sidewalk, you know, kids and adults and stuff. And then they released the flamingos, and the flamingos just love people's hair, particularly like yours. You know, it's curly like that. They were going through it like, there's got to be some crustacean here. And so the amazing thing is the kids got to see the flamingo really close. We have to have those sorts of experiences for kids and for adults. That's how we care, so that we won't want to kill the last ones. We
Turn
want
them
to
into
have
golf
them.
gloves. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
so I think having these ambassador animals, so that we have to do better by zoos and aquariums, in that they have to have a better conservation message.
Exactly. So that
And-
people can then not just going to go for the cute experience, but to then leave with an action plan, so
That's
that
right.
they're able to really do better in their daily lives to ensure that the penguins in the wild are there to, you know, now and into the future.
And the zoos are getting to be better. The 21st century zoos are better than those of any time in the past, because
And now we just have to make sure that most all their messages are conservation messages.
and to
Right.
think like
And
the
that they're
animal.
doing conservation in the wild. I mean,
Right.
it's great to do husbandry and to keep the animals alive, which is what they got to do to bring in the gate money. But
Sure.
you want to make sure that people really have these experiences with animals and love them, so that they'll do something for the animals in the wild.
Absolutely. It's that whole circle again.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
even zoos can sometimes take advantage of animals and abuse them. And aquariums, if they aren't, I say they're getting a whole lot better than they used to be,
Yeah.
and mindful that they are sacrificed. They're not in their home turf, but a well-run zoo or aquarium where you really take into account and empathize with the animals and what they eat, the space they have.
And
It's
people have to realize that many of these animals have a very difficult life in the wild. I
That's
mean,
right.
penguins eating
Yeah.
by leopard seals.
Oh,
they don't
yeah.
have to worry about that in zoos.
that's
right.
right.
Nobody's going to eat them.
No, and they got free groceries.
And they got pretty good health care in many
That's
zoos.
right. That's
We
right.
just need to improve those sorts of things. But I think as ambassador animals, zoos and aquariums do a very important role, educational role.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
do too. Okay, let's see. There's an issue with veterinarians encouraging people to give their dogs and cats omega oil supplements. I had my veterinarian scold me for refusing to do this. What can we do? So, you know, I think just trying to, I mean, yes, dogs and cats are carnivores, right? And you can't force them to eat plants. They're not going to eat, there's
Broccoli.
not going to be like a Beyond Dog burger, no. But, you know, we can make better choices to go and feed them animals that are lower on the food chain, you know, like a turkey or chicken. But I think that, you know, if you do want to give them an omega-3 supplement, same answer as with people, you know, you do it with something that's algae based,
Yeah, plant-based.
plant-based for that, you know.
You can grow because fish oil and krill oil is not generated by the fish or the krill.
Right.
In both cases, in all cases, it starts with the phytoplankton. And that's where the engine is for taking the basic ingredients of food and converting it to the omega oils
Mhm.
that are good for life, I suppose, good for creatures. Whether it's a menhaden oil or oil,
Or a herring oil.
Herring oil,
Yeah,
salmon oil.
When I was a kid, my mom used to give my brothers and me cod liver oil.
Oh, the worst.
I can still taste it. But the cod didn't manufacture that omega oil. They got it through the food chain.
Right.
So cut out the fish, cut out the krill, go straight to the source.
Not only
And-
that, it's a much healthier choice because of, algae that's grown in, in cultivation is not going to be full of the microplastics and the other chemicals that bioaccumulate in the fish that are
Right, the toxic materials.
toxic materials that are crushed down and become part and parcel of those supplements.
Yeah, and they're not more expensive. That's the great thing.
And we
No,
all should be eating lower on the food chain if we want to continue to sustain 7.5 billion people on this planet.
Right. So
yeah,
it is something all of us can do, and realizing that most of the fish from the ocean not only are high on the food chain, top predators or even mid-level predators, but they live longer than a chicken or a cow.
yeah,
And every year that they are sustained in the ocean, that means more groceries are invested. Think about a whale. How many groceries for a 30-year-old whale?
or a 50-year-old whale.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
Or a 180-year-old bowhead whale.
yeah.
Right. Or a 400-year-old Greenland shark.
Yeah.
So George says, how about establishing a mission blue? What would Sylvia do?
What would Dee do?
And what would Dee do? 100 alternative consumer
What would Liz do?
choices. So I think it's a worthy enterprise. I think, if we can if people want to start sending in ideas, we should start up a list. I think we definitely should. So we're kind of we're at the top of the hour. Dee, I don't know if you have time to stick with
Another
us for
3 or 4 minutes.
a couple of minutes more, but we have if I can attempt to share the screen for yet a second time.
Okay.
Sylvia wanted to show a little video because between the COP26 and the launch of her new book and Thanksgiving, we're only going to do one episode in November, but we thought that it'd be really useful to keep Antarctica, the home of penguins, really in everybody's mind. So I'm going to see if I can do this again. This is twice.
Oh, I would like that.
Twice in one episode. You want me to try to do this? It's really, oh my God, no. No. Oh, where did it go? Here it is. Let's see if we can get this to run.
Put it on play.
Yes, I'm getting there. Oh my God. What did you do?
Antarctica is the highest, coldest, driest, windiest place on Earth.
This huge, frozen, remote continent and the waters that surround it may seem irrelevant to our daily lives, but they're vital for our survival.
They play a huge role in how our planet and climate function.
Antarctica houses 90% of the world's ice and helps keep the planet cool and livable.
It's home to amazing marine life.
The rich currents swirling around the continent are giant conveyor belts that feed the fish which feed the world.
While it may seem vast and remote, it is increasingly fragile and vulnerable.
It's on the front line of climate change and biodiversity with melting ice and industrial fishing.
The global community must stand up and take urgent action to significantly protect it.
In the last 5 years, Antarctica has lost an average of 219 billion tons of ice per year.
3 large-scale marine protected areas are currently proposed in East Antarctica, the Weddell Sea, and the Antarctic Peninsula.
Together, this would ensure the protection of 7 million square kilometers.
So the governance framework is in place. The scientific evidence is clear. Only political will is now standing in the way.
As the famous Antarctic explorer Ernest Shackleton said, "Through endurance, we conquer." This is exactly the ethos of the Antarctic 2020 group.
We call on world leaders
to join us
in honoring a commitment
to conserve Antarctica for future generations.
Certainly is a key topic for the upcoming discussions in Glasgow, COP26. One of the headlines that I'm so pleased to see finally coming into focus is the connection between the ocean, not just the ocean and climate, but the living ocean and climate. It's not just rocks and water. It's not just the ocean as a transporter of heat and cold. It's the fact that it's alive. And our discussion about the food chains in the sea with penguins is right in the center of showing how this works. You know, you take the penguins, take the krill out of Antarctica, and the system basically
Collapses.
unravels. Yeah.
Yep.
But you take any of the species out, you create a shock. The sharks, the loss of 90% of the sharks in the ocean has really changed not just the conspicuous nature of the composition of life in the ocean. The chemistry is affected when you take out these large predators that process what they eat and turn nutrients back into the ocean that powers the carbon capturing mechanisms and generates oxygen and shapes this blue miracle that Dee commented on, that all of the universe. Where else is there any place like this?
Exactly.
Nowhere. And what's causing the harm? Look in the mirror. What can fix it? Look in
We
the
can.
mirror.
Exactly.
And that's why sentinel species are so particularly important, because we care usually about sentinel species, and people care about penguins.
They really
So
do.
I hope that people will, eat differently, think differently about Antarctica, and think differently about their choices, because what you decide to do makes a huge difference for other creatures that we share this planet with.
Yes.
You're here.
Well, thank you, Dee. You are a true reason for hope.
A hope spot. There
You're a
she
hope
is.
spot right there.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it a lot.
Yes, we really appreciate you and really making a difference for penguins and the natural systems that they and that really all of us rely upon.
And for the future of all of us.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we're going to sign off, and thank you. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to Ocean Elders, our producer. We're going to be back next time with Jeff Kirchner, founder of Literati, and Melody, a young ocean advocate and who's leading by example. And until next time, remember that water connects us all. We're grateful to you all. And
The penguins are important.
yes, they are.
Save the penguins, save the life on Earth.
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Until then, remember, protect the ocean.
As if your life depends on it, because
It does.
It does.
it does.
It does. Thank you, Dee. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.